For the first episode of Builder's Journey, I spoke with Alana Podrx, leader of Eve Wealth, a global community of women who share portfolios, co-invest, and support each other in self-guided wealth management through peer-to-peer learning. Alana was part of Seed Club's third accelerator with the project Eve Wealth. In our conversation, we discussed the journey of first deciding to introduce Web3 concepts to the Eve Wealth community, concrete ways of scaling and decentralizing content creation and community work, and her thought process through the evolution of launching a token. Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, Nicole.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great. Excited to chat.
Excellent. Me too. Thank you so much for being here. I've really been enjoying these conversations I've been having with projects, accelerator alumni. I think it's just such a privilege to get to share this builder's journey with others outside of the process who are starting their own journey, and to hear from people on the ground actively building in Web3. So welcome. And for starters, I would love to just kick off and have you introduce who you are and what your project is.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alana, and I have been building something called Eve Wealth, and that is a women's wealth DAO. So you can think of it as a connector of all these incredible finance nodes from asset classes like real estate, cryptocurrency, public markets, and just bringing some of the most talented experts in that space to contribute and create a destination that has more of a feminine lens for anyone who's curious and looking to get started. So all the way from beginner to advanced. And we'll talk more about that, but I don't think there is really a correlation between income or age and wealth or even financial literacy. So we're doing a lot in that space. It's super exciting. And I come from a career in the more traditional finance side. I've spent time in venture capital, private equity, ops, and now, this is a really exciting frontier to bring that into some of the new world of Web3.
Yeah, so I know we've spoken a little bit when we were first getting to know each other about, how you came upon the spark of Eve Wealth and how this, came to you. I would love to hear that, and then also explore a little bit more about how and why you decided Web3 was the place where you wanted to build this.
Yeah, I don't know if so much of this was like deciding versus it just happening in life, like most things are. I think we have more of an illusion of our own control in some of this stuff. But, I mentioned a little bit in the bio that, I'd spent a lot of my career in this like traditional finance world, but I didn't come from there originally. I come from a family of artists, for Canadian, lots of focus on social infrastructure, but not a lot of financial infrastructure in my early years and early life. So I, purposefully chose a life of more entrepreneurial and finance focus so that I could, in a way survive. Like it was a survival mechanism for me. And when in March 2020 happened and the markets were crashing, I, for the first time again in my life, felt that like financial insecurity and fear, and like realizing that some of the women in my life, especially that I looked to as role models that came from the world that I was in, of venture capital or private equity, deploying hundreds of millions of dollars in capital for the institutions that they worked with or for. But, almost all of them were just doing nothing for themselves and holding a ton in cash. And we just saw this huge opportunity for us to be coming together more and being accountable to investing that. Because as you know, or maybe not know, cash loses to inflation. So especially this year, we can talk about the numbers, but in November, inflation was around 6.8%. So for every $100 that you just held on to, you lose, $6.8. And for every $100 that you invested over the past year, you earned 21. And then that would have compounded. So in the next year, it would have been 21% potentially on the 121 if the rates stayed the same. So it just was this like shocking realization that even some of the people who apparently know this world the most still felt so disconnected and nervous and like curious to get started and knowing that they should, but just like missing some of the core infrastructure. And that was really surprising to me because it feels like we're bombarded with information. The internet is full of financial advice. And, I think we started to realize that bringing really high caliber, curated expertise and connection and community was the path forward. And it wasn't until recently that even the tools for DAOs enable someone who doesn't have as technical of a background to be able to use some of the infrastructure that we now use that allows us to bring in and onboard some women from, more traditional financial backgrounds into this space where we can actually collaborate and build. And, there's been community building for, the history of time and organization for the history of time. But now I think what we're seeing is this coalescence of not just the social but economic benefits of community building. And that's what we're super excited about.
Yeah, I want to explore that a little bit more because I think that, there's these like two really critical elements. There's your call to adventure and clearly like that's so compelling as far as the process and sort of how you came to that realization. And then there's how you started bringing people together around it. I think that, I guess my question is, what were those first steps? I mean, it sounds like you had the realization of like, this is a place where I can have real immediate impact. I have this professional experience. I have this knowledge. And this is something that I care deeply about. And clearly you shared that was also just a part of your upbringing was, this sense of giving back and supporting others. And so, when you had that realization that this was something that was important to you, where did you start? Who did you turn to? Because I think that that's a question I get so often of like, I have an idea. I think that there's an opportunity here. I think I'm the person to do this, but I don't have a community yet. And so what were those first steps? Who were those first calls and what were they like?
Yeah, I really love this point and question because I feel like people always believe that it's just kind of like handed to you, or it'll just arrive and be ready. And actually, there's like so many steps. And I didn't actually feel, there is that rejection of the call, to the hero's journey. And I also had that. I was like, I'm not a finance person. I'm not going to build anything in fintech. Like my background, I was actually in the middle of helping build like a real estate property tech company. Like I was stuck in Argentina. Like it was not what I was expecting. And it really started with just the most basic first step. I was just like, I'm going to bring together 5 of those women who are honestly good friends. Like we were already running women's circles that were more like accountability and personal talk and kind of like the conversations that, I don't want to, not to stereotype, but like women are more comfortable having on maybe some work topics and relationships, but definitely not investing. Like I didn't have that community where I was talking about like deal flow or the things that I was doing in DeFi. I'm like, no, DeFi, no one even knows what DeFi is. So I felt so alone. And honestly, like in the beginning stages, it was mostly like my boyfriends or maybe some guy friends professionally that I could talk to that stuff with. And I was on WhatsApp groups with like definitely hedge fund bros and stuff. And God, I love them. They're super smart, but it's just like, it wasn't my space. So I never spoke. Like I was really silent, even though I felt like I had a lot I could contribute. I just wasn't. So I was just like, forget this. We're going to get a small crew together and start doing these things and just see how it goes. And it was, the first call I made actually was to a friend, Morgan, who is brilliant and runs a family office, and, was just like, do you want to jam and talk, and what are you investing in, and, should we start meeting? And then she pulled together 3 other women. I pulled together 3 other women who are very close. And it started just as this weekly meeting. And all of us would do a lot of work and research on public equities at that time, because that's where we were seeing the most opportunity. And then somebody would hear about what we were doing and want to get included. So, we'd add 2 people in, and then kept adding and adding. And then by the end of the summer, we were running like multiple of these circles. And I was like, there's something here. Like, people are really looking for this connection. And what do we do next? So I think that was like really, really organic. And I think community compounds. Like, sometimes it just takes like 2 people. There's the person who comes up with the spark, the idea, they receive the muse, and actually the person who gives that person the most potential and really establishes them as a leader is kind of that first follower, the first person that goes, hey, that's a great idea. Like, I want to help. So both of those roles are really important. The person who comes up with the spark, and the first person that they can convince to come along on the ride with them. And I'm really grateful. I've many of those people who've just really shown up and said, yeah, it's a good idea. How can I help? And that's the core of our core contributor community now, and I just think it's been really special. And advice for people really trying to start in Web3 kind of DAO type building. This was right in 2020. So at that point, I'd only ever been in like one server on Discord ever. And I opened it and I closed it. I was like, nope, this is a gamer, like weird, all black screen, purple vibe, like no way. It wasn't until probably like a year later that I opened Discord again and was like, okay, we're going to give this a shot, because this is where this world is building. So my advice on that is, it is where kind of a lot of this is starting to happen now. And it can just be as easy as like instead of me, where I like invited people to a recurring calendar meeting, like add those 5 people or one other person into a Discord server, and, just learn what that looks like, and start meeting in the video audio chat there. It doesn't have to be like this big community that you port over into Discord for it to be valid and, something worth starting.
I love so many pieces that you just shared. That community compounds is just like so incredibly powerful. And it's also so true. I think that, certainly in traditional startup culture, the founder is so celebrated, and yes, that's wonderful. And big ideas are an important part of this process. But I think that you're also right that like those big ideas are nowhere without that community, and without those couple people supporting and acting as, resonators and as reflectors and as like strengtheners. Like, obviously you need a sounding board to strengthen and build those ideas. So that's such a critical part. And it's so true that it really does just start with a couple of people. And that's ultimately like how we've seen all of these communities grow. I think that it's just hard to imagine that something so large could start with just, a group chat, basically. Well, I would love to sort of now talk about, you talked a little bit about your first experience with Discord, which, yes, it's definitely, the UX, I think, reflects its target population. And I think that it's, as a product, probably a little bit surprised at this adoption by this completely other population. And obviously, like, pivoting and working to embrace that group as well. But I guess my question is even a little bit deeper. Was your introduction to DAOs and sort of the concept behind them through DeFi originally? Like, how did you start to realize, okay, this might be something where it would make sense to bring in tokens or some crypto concepts or tech. What was that process like, and how did you get there?
Yeah, such a great question because we had as a group, we were running these circles as of, early last year. It was just building so quickly, and we felt really centralized as a team. Like, how are we going to allow this to scale? And I started to just really focus on this mantra for myself of community, not competition. And you'd be amazed what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And just really reach out to other women because I was really struggling. Our team was struggling. How do we scale? How do we especially scale good content, right? You see so much crap on the internet, which is what is a 401k? That doesn't help anybody. And financial advice is really inaccessible, right? The best wealth managers typically have really high minimums, and then Robo kind of keeps you, it's so efficient. It's great for a passive strategy, but there's a lot of people in between who are just really struggling for information. And I think it's just too much for one person to bear on content creation across every asset class. So started to connect with all these different women leading different initiatives, right? Somebody who was starting a full Web2 regular company, content, templates, tools for real estate and first-time home ownership, and connecting with somebody who was working on impact 401ks, and somebody who was working on a portfolio share tool, and mostly just become friends with those people and be allies, because it's really hard to raise capital, especially as a female founder, a single female founder. And it's really hard to build good content. And all of these people had such great intentions, really a heart of service, but were kind of burning out from doing it by themselves. And even I was well, how do we come together? There's no really incentive. In the traditional venture world, we all would have raised our own capital, and we're all sort of doing our own thing, and it was just awkward. We didn't know how to work together beyond just being allies and friends. And then my path was this one path on finance and Eve sort of forming in this Web2 world, and then my artistic path, which always has been a big part of me. I've painted since I was very, very young. My dad's an architect. It's one of my first companies that helped me pay for school. And it's actually what got me into crypto. I sold a painting early on for Bitcoin, and I just started to pay attention. And it was a total social experiment. I think it was around the time where 50 Cent had sold part of his records or something for Bitcoin. I was if 50 Cent's doing it, I guess I should do it. But it was totally not really thought out. And so I was also very early on trying to figure out the NFT space last November, because I didn't have an art studio anymore. I was physically locked in my place because of COVID. There's all these kind of accidental things that led to me being part of, NFT, which is really a technology, the culture and some of these communities like FWB that were integrating those two. And I remember, first hearing about FWB, seeing their Miami, Excel spreadsheet, which was their events for the conference that was happening in the spring. And I was what is this FWB thing? But how cool, you use a token to get into the event. I'm that's a really cool idea. And I saw the landing page, and then slowly I started to connect the dots that, all these women that I'd been connecting with who were builders, that missing link that could unite us all could actually be this concept of a DAO and the token and the contributor process, and this new sort of digital way of organizing. And I just thought, what another great, fun social experiment, just selling a painting for Bitcoin. Why not try it?
And I love that concept of the shared incentive. And sort of being able to be on this builder's journey together, supporting each other, and you're really building an ecosystem together. Like you mentioned, you had all of these people that, ultimately sort of helped put together the various pieces of what Eve Wealth is becoming. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit actually about that because I have been fortunate enough to be lurking a little bit and participating even when I can in Eve Wealth. And one of my greatest joys, and I don't know, I need to clone myself so that I can do this. I know you suggested a newsletter, which I think makes tons of sense because as projects come through the accelerator, I'm not going to be able to be in all of the communities, which like greatly pains me. But I do really enjoy Eve Wealth and I love being in the community. And what I've seen is, early beginnings of people introducing themselves and there not being necessarily as much sort of like busyness and traffic. And what we're quickly seeing, what I'm sure you see a ton of, is more activity and more people stepping up and taking on leadership roles, coming up with ideas, starting things. And so I'm just curious, what has that process been like? And then, knowing that you are a person behind the scenes thinking about this every day, obviously doing a ton of work to support it, how much of it is just starting to bubble up and how much of it has been sort of actively seeded by you, and how much of that has been a transition? Are you seeing that like maybe the flywheel is starting to, run a little bit or that the scales are tipping?
It's so interesting. I think we've just sort of taken things step by step. And I have to say that I always have to say we, because, we have an amazing community lead, Amanda, who's also kind of like an operator, and myself who drive a lot of the day-to-day, but we have a whole like army of people who have sort of come to the fold to help, from design to product to editorial. And I think there's a few things that happen, which is like we really tried to create the infrastructure and the container and then slowly welcome people into that, especially trusted people who had been longtime members of the circles and had really shown up as contributors. And I think honestly felt they had learned and benefited so much from the service that we provided, like how much in the more like early days we were able to really help people like increase their investment rates and their savings rates and, make their first angel investments or, invest into decentralized finance or even understand what that meant and that they had a place there. And there's something about reciprocity and like the flow of things and the flow of energy. And I really think like when you lead with service and you don't focus on the money or the outcomes and you just do the thing that you just can't not do. Like I had to, and Amanda had to, like we feel like we really want to see more representation in this like new world of finance. So people magnetize to that. Like you find your people who also feel called to like serve in that way. And then it starts to organically come. But I think it's like focusing on the right things for yourself, right? Don't focus on money or accomplishment or ego. Focus on service and things will come and flow. And as we think about how this community is starting to flow, honestly, it's those early investments of really showing up for people, really adding value to their world and their life and their confidence in finance and their careers and just like personally showing up in a really hard time. And they're the ones who are stepping up now and causing this ability for us to decentralize ourselves and to have more scale. So that's important. I'd also say like there is a role of some structures, right? Like having and knowing your audience really well is important. Like for us, unlike most Discords where you kind of jump into the chaos and you're just in like all these channels, we have a pretty solid high touch onboarding process. And that means that we need to have a member application process and do things the way that we do. But that's because it's really important to our group that they feel held and brought into the container and really, guided. And we take it seriously to like show women how to get a digital wallet. Step by step, we will help you press the buttons. And people really appreciate that. And like the people who introduce you to this world, you do have deep connection to and loyalty with and like want to help too. And so very quickly they're like, well, how can I contribute into this space? And then we've made it really easy in like the get involved channel where there's a contributor worksheet and we list out, all the different things that would help build the community. And, any talent is possible. Like I think I always try to remind people, like I got into this space because my talent of physical painting wasn't because of my financial knowledge or literacy or anything like that. And so whether it's design or even like note taking and synthesizing information for a group for, continuity, that's also valuable. So I think there's a lot of ways to contribute, and people need, some structure so they know how to guide through, and, thoughtfulness about how people join a community depending on where they are in their journeys and who they are. And just to focus on service. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. There's so many threads I want to explore there. Okay. So I think for starters, I just want to sort of highlight that piece where you talked about all of the different ways that people contribute to communities, because I think that has been, for me, just such a lovely and thrilling aspect of Web3, where there's a lot of pieces of types of work, quite frankly, that women have often been trained in previously, that and have been, undervalued, underpaid, sort of under recognized in various sort of like traditional hierarchies, that we're now realizing are so incredibly important. So like, yes, like the synthesis of information, the taking of minutes and turning that into, important documents, the onboarding, the sort of like, quote unquote, like emotional and invisible labor that so often, no matter like what the hierarchy, no matter what the job title, often falls to, the woman in the team. And so I think that is just so interesting in Web3, that we're seeing kind of this like A, demand, and B, reckoning as far as the value of that work. So yeah, I think that's a theme I've seen across. And like you said, I think that it's often a surprise for people coming in that this is something that is so in demand. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that, but it's definitely been a big surprise and welcome surprise for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So we've had some of these conversations in the past when I'm sort of onboarding new people, especially into the expert contributor roles. So we have functional leads for things like marketing, product, finance. And we have content leads for the asset classes like real estate, crypto, public markets, impact, and it comes up a lot where they're sort of like, in my traditional role or wherever I came from before, like, they might have sort of a side affiliation group that they're building, that they maybe get credit for in their reviews. But I agree that in more the traditional space, women are asked often to be leaders and mentors and advisors and to run affiliate networks and groups within organizations. But it is really based off of more like social capital and social infrastructure rather than there really being a broader incentive and then that equaling increased governance abilities and just general guidance of the strategy of the thing. And I think that's what's really interesting about DAOs, because all those things are true in a DAO. And and all of those skills actually are what make the DAO successful. So it's self-fulfilling, and I think that's really exciting. I also think women have historically had to use soft power for millennia, and so we're actually quite well trained in this ability to influence and direct, but with like femininity, and not just women, but like, men and women have feminine traits and masculine traits. And I think it's a really exciting time because I think we're seeing some of this movement and evolution, and people also looking for more meaning in their day-to-day jobs. And I think that they're finding that in DAOs. So a lot of people do have, full-time jobs, but come into the DAO to contribute their special, unique talents, or even multiple DAOs, because it brings them a sense of connection, community, and meaning that they may feel like they're missing from their 9 to 5.
You talked a little bit about shared incentives, and I think that, and then you talked a little bit about social capital, and I think that that's also just such a huge piece of where we're at with Web3, where capital is more than just financial, and there's all these new ways that we're measuring social capital, reputation. I'm curious, like, as Eve is evolving, how much of those incentives are part of your community's conversation, and how much of those are related to the tokens, for example? So, I believe you're fairly like early in your community's token journey. And so, to pivot a little bit, I would love to understand a little bit more about how you've been thinking about that, how you've been going from like what's very much a social relationship incentive structure, and really just calling on that like desire for service and the connection that you have from like being onboarded by somebody and wanting to support somebody else in that process. And now, starting to introduce tokens into that conversation, into that community, into that ecosystem. What has that been like?
Yeah, this is one of those things where I feel like it takes a lot of intention. And when I first joined Seed Club, I was like, great, like I think I even told Jess, I'm like, we're already like, it's going to launch. We're doing the token like tomorrow. And it was from that time with other people in the cohort to realize like all the implications of doing something like that. It's so easy to like see somebody else doing something and then think you should follow it. But there's a lot of considerations from like how that impacts your own community, who and how you want people to influence, how that thing evolves, and what works for your specific group. So I was really humbled to like take a step back and really be intentional about how we were going to use these different tools for our community in the way that makes sense for us. So, instead of having this like open token for everyone right now, it was really important for us that we had more of like a membership NFT that allowed you to become part of the Eve universe, but not quite yet jump into governance, right? Because we're trying to introduce, like it took me a long time to try to understand governance and voting and participation and treasury and management and treasury diversification. And I think of it a lot like a university endowment, right? Like people apply to come to the university and everyone should benefit from like the education, and there's a rigorous application process and you get your certificate and degree at the end of it. And that's a huge accomplishment. That's like, Eve's NFT. And then there are other students who really rise up and they do their PhDs and they become professors and they become tenured, and maybe they're even on the board and they're guiding and directing the endowment. And the endowment sometimes builds some of the best infrastructure in the world, which is super exciting. So that's like our tokens. Our tokens are for, tenured professors who are helping to guide and build that endowment for future generations of students. And so that's how we're thinking about it. But that endowment voting mechanism for us shouldn't just be like on a public exchange right now where anyone could guide it. And that's just important for us because we're in the early stages of building that community and having some of that governance happen that really adds value and creates a space that we want to be able to create. So yeah, our focus is really actually on, driving revenue to the treasury through our, tuition and our the service that we provide and the offering that we have to, our students or members, and then that being the really valuable thing that our tenured professors and our governance tokens can help govern and direct so that we can get more resources, more infrastructure that supports the community.
Yeah, I mean, that makes tons of sense. And, I think that it's important to remember that these are not necessarily new models where people come together, generate value as a community, and then find ways to share that value and reinvest it back into making something stronger. I mean, that's not new. I think what's exciting is that now we're able to own the community and own the various tools and capture that regardless of, like, if you stay on Discord, if you go somewhere else, your community and the value travels with you. So yeah, I think that piece is brilliant.
Yeah. And honestly, Nicole, like, having worked in Fortune 500s for most of my career, like I started, in consulting, and have seen the process of board decision making and shareholder voting. The first time I ever saw a snapshot, I was like, this is going to change the world. Just the fact that there's this idea of like distributed voting and that it was happening overnight, and like incentives were aligned, right? Like you had to sometimes contribute tokens, or you would earn tokens from voting, or if you don't vote along the direction of other people, that was where the group ended up going. It would, take tokens away. Like that whole process of voting, which was, starting to really come to the forefront. I think I first saw it in like November last year. I was like, this is so powerful. It is different. The actual process and systems are similar, but the tools and the infrastructure and then therefore the access are different. And that's where I think this gets really interesting. Same with NFTs. Like we've been seeing them applied in art and culture, and like that's really exciting to me. But when I hear people say, oh, like NFTs are this generation's Beanie Babies, I'm like, I think you're thinking about, one subset of a technology that is actually really powerful. Like NFTs are just basically unique codes that hold information. And that has a lot of applications that, I think are really exciting.
Yeah, a little bit more than just a Beanie Baby. Well, there's one important point that I want to touch on, and it's going back a little bit, but you talked about, you remember the first person who helped you set up a wallet. And I felt, definitely like a lot of empathy and, as you were going through not your own personal wallet journey, but like setting up your community's, wallet and sort of governance structure and, for lack of a better word, I guess, financial structure, although that's not, I don't know, that doesn't sound like the right term, but whatever the Web3 version of that is, I think that we as, self-taught, folks over the last year or so have all experienced these pain points. And I'm curious how you have sort of brought those experiences into how you support your community in Web3, because I think that there's all these moments. I mean, for me, it was when I was trying to bridge Matic from Polygon to mainnet or something like that. And it took me hours, and I was confused and frustrated and kept on just burning gas in the wrong direction and got angry and finally succeeded and felt so proud. And I think we've all had those moments of doing something on chain or doing something with a Web3 tool where you just feel so dumb. But then you're victorious and you get it. And you want to support somebody else with that learning. And we've had conversations before struggling with some of the pieces of technology. And I'm curious, I think it's really important to experience that. I actually personally think that that's an important learning point. And I'm curious how you balance that tension of like wanting people to experience a little bit of friction while also helping support their onboarding.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think that this will be like dated in a few years, right? We'll realize that like all the UX and UI is going to be fixed. Where we are right now is like, I remember being, young, and this is going to, date maybe both of us, but like in the early internet, like you had to code your own like little HTML pages that would be almost like your personal profile. And you'd have to like go and Google like the string of code that could like change your title to like a different color. And that was like clunky and like hard. And you made a lot of mistakes, and all of a sudden it'd be like red, or it would change the structure, and it would look horrible. So it's like these like learning curves that happen in early technologies. So like I think we look at those moments really fondly, like that we struggled a little bit and that we even tried. Like how cool. And then when you're thinking about Web3, I think it's just so important to have your crew. And that's really where Eve hopes to come into, is like, just like make your first friend. Like who's your first friend in this world who's equally like financially curious and financially ambitious, and like have those people around you who can actually just show you how to press the button. Sometimes that's all it takes, is you to be able to ask and say, I just don't know how to press the button. And we get that all the time at Eve, and we actually so welcome that and celebrate it. It's like when somebody's like, I have tried for the sixth time to like connect to Collabland, right? And it's like, okay, cool. Like we'll literally get on a call and we'll just go through the process. Like, do I sign this? Do I sign this? And it's like really stressful. You're pressing sign, and confirm with like a bunch of lines of code. And you're like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. Am I like signing the right thing? And, we've seen a lot of the phishing attacks that happen on Discord that empty out wallets. There's like a lot of scary things that can happen if you don't have a few people early on to just like give you the heads up, right? And I have my own mentors too. Like I actively go and ask them questions constantly to people in my life, so I can learn, different things in DeFi. And, somebody did teach me how to do the bridging as well. So I think just all of this comes down to finding a place where you feel comfortable to ask those questions that resonates with like your kind of people. And like, that's totally okay if you don't fit in with one that's like more meme or like, aping into stuff. And it's totally okay if you want to do much more, stable, chill, first introductory blue chip stuff too. Like, just find that space that resonates with you and the people that you feel like you can connect with and ask the questions to, because you're going to have to ask the questions. Like this stuff is not Googleable. Not yet. And it's not, the UI and UX is not there yet either. So you got to find your people. That's it.
Yeah, I think it's often more Twitterable than it is Googleable, interestingly. Like, if anything, that's often where I find my answers. But yeah, you're so right. I think we have to wrap up, but I would love to hear, if there's any exciting next steps that you can share about Eve Wealth, and then importantly, where can we find you and your community?
Yeah, of course. So you can find Eve at evewealth.com or Eve Wealth HQ on Twitter. And so we're posting there. And then I personally am Alana Podrx, Podrx, on Twitter as well. So I'm posting kind of my journey, builder's journey there too. And kind of next steps, we're super excited for the new year. We're starting to launch and expand more publicly and open things up, which is super exciting. We'll be kicking off a DeFi course with a feminine voice and feminine lens starting in early February. So hopefully be a really great resource for women, and just, come in and join and see if there's a way that you want to contribute, because building a new universe and a new world is going to take a lot of hands. And we have some incredible people coming to the forefront to do that right now, like ex-radio DJ, Disney DJ, a New York Times bestselling author, and podcast experts are single-handedly together launching our podcast in the new year as well. So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening, and it's really being driven by the people who want to see this world exist.
That is so amazing. I would like to be in the first row for that DeFi course. So please save me a seat. And congrats. This is so huge. Yeah, congrats on this past year, and really excited for 2022.
Amazing. Thanks, Nicole. Great to chat.
Great to chat. Thank you so much.